YouTube. Coming at you with a third installment of my great-great-grandfather's memoir of the Civil War. Smoking the Moretti, and in it I've got some Howl of the Wind. The wind is not howling this evening, but there is a little bit of a breeze. Also, I've got my Black Crackle Zippo and an ebony tamper that was made by Tamper Tantrum, Jeff. So anyways, let's get into it. I guess one quick note from last time. Thanks to Jeff the Chef for pointing out that Andersonville Prison was not a place that sent convicts, so my great-great-uncle was most likely not a convict, but rather it was a prisoner of war camp. So he was a prisoner of war. I don't think we find out in here if he ever got out of there. I did look. There are some things online where it's got records. I think Ancestry. I did see a Thomas Mason that was in Andersonville, but he was from Illinois. So I don't know how good the records are, but at any rate, Andersonville Prison was a Confederate POW camp, and from what I understand, they could kind of barely feed their own soldiers, let alone prisoners of war. So very poor health there. Dysentery was common. A lot of guys died there. So on that note, I'll start with chapter 3. It was in 1864, we had a big raid which took us through many states, and while in Alabama, we went to camp at a place called I can't pronounce that. I think it's an Indian name. Koskichi? Named for an Indian chief. So there you go. The planters around there and big slave owners began to be afraid that their slaves would run away. So they called for safeguards, and it was quite a treat to become a safeguard as we thought it. The captain appointed me to go to a very large plantation. So I mounted my horse and went to the place designated and met the old gentleman. He was a man close to 80 years old. He received me, and I told him what I was sent there for. He said he was glad. What he wanted was protection from our soldiers. He would guarantee me against harm of any trouble from his side. So I went into the house, and those old-fashioned houses are made with a large hall in the center. On one side, a great fireplace where they do the cooking, and on the other is their parlor and receiving rooms. From the hall, you could look down and see the Negro quarters on each side for half a mile. Each slave had an acre of ground and a little cabin, but they had to go to work in the morning at the tap of a bell and had to work all day without 1 cent of pay. So I sat down in the hall, looking down the street, where the old man came to me and said, "Won't you take off your arms and rest yourself?" I said, "No, sir. Not for a while." So I stayed there probably half an hour when I heard some laughing, and 3 ladies came jumping in and were surprised when they saw a young soldier there, greeted me, and retreated into their rooms. They had been out in the orchard and gathered a lot of fruit. When they came out with a tray of fruit, they came to me, asking if I would have some, which I might which I was mighty glad to sample. They sat down on the stoop pretty close to me. There must have been 25 or more little Pekini and Negro babies, all the way from 1 year and a half to 2 and 3 years old, and these girls could call all by name. They gave them a plum or some kind of fruit for which they seemed tickled. I said, "You are familiar with those children?" They laughed and said, "These are our future slaves." It made me come to think. So it went along all right until about 9 o'clock that night. The old man came to me and said, "You need not be afraid. I will guarantee you no harm. You better lay off your arms. I want you to walk with me down the street and look into each and every Negro slave quarter and see if any had run away." Well, I made up my mind that that man was sincere all right, so I unslung my carbine and laid off my saber and kept my revolver buckled tightly to my waist. With that, I will trust him, and on that we went. And the old man was so well posted on that business, he could open every door and tell by the sound of the snore and the quietness whether there were all there or not. We went into all the houses, which must have been 100, if not more, and opened the door and listened. When he returned, we went into the house again and sat for a few minutes, and he told me his troubles. He told me about losing his son-in-law. He had 1 or 2 boys in the rebel army, and he lost all confidence of gaining their cause when Vicksburg surrendered. He said Vicksburg was the last key to the whole thing. I being a very young boy, and knowing very little about history, I thought what he said was pretty nearly true. So he got to be pretty social, and I looked good to me. And he said to me, "What is your name?" And I told him. He asked, "Do you ever drink anything?" "Hardly ever," I said. "We try to keep our heads." He replied, "I have something in the cellar that has not seen daylight for 7 years. "Well," says I would not mind sampling it. So the old man got a couple of little glasses. He gave me a glass, and it seemed to taste good. He took a glass himself, and it seemed so that we were old friends. And after we sat there talking for quite a while, he says to me, "I will call you Bill, because I had a boy the name of Bill." He said, "You would like it here." I'm sorry. He said, "Would you like to hear some music?" I said, "Yes. I love music, but I'm no player myself." So he went in through the hall and into the room where the piano was standing, and one of the girls, who are all graduates of Vicksburg Musical College up there, showed me where 3 of the ivory keys were taken off of the piano, and she said, when Sherman was here and some of his men, they took them for their souvenirs. After that, the girls said, "We will do the best we can." Those 3 girls, one was a widow, and the father and the old lady stood up at the piano, and first thing they said to me, "Have you any objections if we sing our national song?" I said, "No, go ahead." They sang the Bonnie Blue Flag and the rebel soldiers and the little songs that were spicy and nice, and after they sang them, one of the girls started out with some of our national airs. I do not know where they got them. "My Country 'Tis of Thee" and several of the songs we used to sing at home. So we passed away the evening very nicely. It was a treat for me. They seemed so very friendly. So the old man came to me and beckons me to come, and when I got in the hall, we had a couple more glasses. He put an arm around my shoulder and he says, "Bill, I want to ask you a favor." I said, "What is it?" "In that room my son lays, who has come home to spend a few days, and he wants to see you." And I said, "Draw him out." A fine young boy, about my age, and do you know, they played and we danced until the broad daylight. We had a nice lunch in the morning. When we heard the bugles blowing, the camp got ready. I knew it would only be a short time because they had to pass that way to come along. And then we saw the head of the column coming. They had a beautiful hedge fence with a large pedestal on each side of the gate. I got on my horse, and the girls sat on each side while the column passed by, and waited there about a half an hour until my company arrived. Captain Brooks, seeing the position I was in, came up to me, and he says, "You rascal, why didn't you let me know?" I told him, "I know a good thing when I see it." All right, that's chapter 3, a short one, so I'll go on to chapter 4. The 4th Wisconsin does not claim to have done all the fighting, but they do claim to getting in as many different states of the Confederacy as we were in every Confederate state except Virginia. And they all say we made more miles than any other regiment, as we were scouters all the time. Our company was, at one time, Sherman's bodyguard, and other different generals, as we often detailed here and there, whether they wanted orders from our regiment. Immediately after the Union Army received its check at Sabine Crossroad, and the retreat commenced, Colonel Bailey engineered the 19th Corps, learned that the Red River was rapidly falling, and became assured that by the time Admiral Porter's fleet could reach Alexandria, there would not be sufficient water to float the gunboats over the Alexandria Falls. It was evident, therefore, that about a mile in length, filled with ragged rocks, and over which an existing stage of water, it seemed impossible to make a channel. The work was commenced by running out from the left bank of the river in a tree dam, made of bodies of very large trees, brush, brick, and stones. Cross-tied, some of these vessels were a most beautiful sight, only to be realized by seeing. They passed over without an accident, except the unshipping of one or two rudders. The scene was witnessed by all the troops, and the vessels were heartily cheered as they went over. The next morning, at 10 o'clock, the Louisville, Chillicothe, Ozark, and 2 tugs passed over without any accident except the loss of a man who was swept off the deck of one of the tugs. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the vessels were coaled, ammunition replaced, and all steamed down the river with the convoy of transports in a company. A good deal of difficulty was anticipated in getting over the bars in the lower Red River, the depth of the water reportedly being only 5 feet, while the gunboats were drawing 6. But there was fortunately a rise from the backwater of the Mississippi, that river being very high just then, the backwater extending to Alexandria, 150 miles distant, enabling them to pass all the bars and obstacles with safety. 8 valuable gunships were thus saved from destruction. Red River was one of the dirtiest rivers that I came across, choked and hard for boats to pass each other. I was going up the Red River one time. There was a boat coming down. The captains of the boats did not blow their whistles, so the boats came together broadside, and the boat that I was on knocked high and dry on the shore. The other kept on as she was going down river. The sides of the river were filled with alligators basking in the sun, and it was nothing to see a dead man floating down the stream, spiked to a plank, with a turkey buzzard scavenging, working the corpse. We could not tell whether the bodies were white or Negroes, as the hot sun colored them and made them look alike. The captains exchanged some hot words. Colonel Bailey was colonel of our regiment, 4th Wisconsin Cavalry, and was promoted to brigadier general for the great work on the Red River, and later became commander of the 19th Army Corps, to which the 4th Wisconsin belonged. When General Bailey was in command of the brigadier, his wife came down to see him and take in the army life. He got up a sham battle to show her how things were done. Outside pickets was drove in, and then came cannons. And then he had cannons and musket shots, and the long roll of bugles sounded everywhere. Fall in. It was a great sight. Infantry, cavalry, and 10-pound artillery, and the gunboats in the Mississippi. It was so real that some of us boys thought it was the real thing, but some of the officers forgot their jugs of commissary, and when they moved back, they found it was taken by the boys. We had lots of trouble on picket duty, as there were all kinds of men and women that would try to get through the picket lines. I remember well a party that would come in once or twice a week with all kinds of excuses and promises. There was one old lady and 2 beautiful daughters, and that was not all. The most beautiful flowers I had ever seen. They had a large covered rig. It was fine, all lined inside with velvet. They said they lived out 40 miles. They must have been very rich people. The old lady and the girls were quite busy making something. Some were knitting, others were making tatting, and one making a dress. There was a big Negro slave driver, and there was a big Negro on behind as a footman. Some style. But we began to become suspicious, so one day the officer of the post had orders to watch out for them on returning trips. That day, they were quite jolly and pleasant, but we dismounted and asked the girls to step out of their carriage. The girls got out first, but the old lady was not so quick to make up her mind to get out, but was told that we had orders to examine all outgoing visitors. The old lady got it out. It was plainly seen that she had concealed goods, and she was asked to step in a light shanty and disrobe, and it was found that she had genuine tobacco, pipes, and several revolvers, and lots of other things. Quinine, which was worth $150 a pound at that time. They were turned over to the provost marshal. All right, so that I think is the only mention of tobacco in this book, but I appreciate, as a pipe smoker, I appreciate the mention there. So apparently they were rich, but they were smugglers. So our company was attached to General Bailey's headquarters March 6th, 1865. We engaged in a skirmish near Clinton, LA, in which they saved the general from being captured, and 7 of the non-commissioned officers were reported to the Washington Department for meritorious conduct, of which I was one. All right, so he's making a name for himself. He got reported for meritorious conduct. March 11th, 1865, we were attached to General Davis headquarters. All right, that brings us to chapter 5. So we will save that one for next time. I'm going to fire up another bowl. But thanks for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.